Okay, so in this next spot we have ace jack suited, folds around, we steal, face a resteal, and here we are. And Belv is an 18-15 over 79 with a 3-bet of 5%. And over 79 hand is going to be tough to know exactly how aggressively he's 3-betting here. It's really too small of a sample size to even really look at resteal percentage, so we're kind of just going to have to make our best guess and estimate and go from there. Now, in this situation, Hero decided to go for a 4-bet, so that's going to give us a lot of stuff to talk about in this hand. But just going back a quick click, let's talk about this for a moment. So this is actually a little bit different than the hand before where we faced a 3-bet, and I was suggesting folding 8s more often. And the reason why this is different is because we are going to be in position, and we also have a hand that's going to hit flops differently. We know with ace jack we're going to hit the flop roughly a third of the time, where we saw with 8s it was definitely going to be a little bit worse, particularly if you consider how often we're going to be catching second, third, and fourth pair on the flop. So it's going to be a little bit different, and also when we catch something with ace jack, especially when we catch like a top pair or just a pair, it's usually going to be a bit more definitive and thus a little bit easier. So this is the kind of situation where I don't hate flatting because it keeps their entire resteal range intact. It allows us to use our position, use our skill, and I think post-flop's going to be much easier to play. So it gives us that level of added flexibility, and that's definitely going to be something that I want to consider. Now, as my hand either gets weaker or his resteal range gets tighter, obviously it's going to shift my opinion, but as of this moment, especially in 6 max games, I'm going to assume that the resteal range is definitely going to be wider than, say, 3 or 4%, and I'm assuming that we can give action at least by calling, which means I'm not going to fold. But Hero decides to go for the 4-bet, and I want to talk about this for a couple different, or actually in a couple different ways. So first and foremost is looking at this from a very mathematical point of view. So if we decide to go for a 4-bet here, the big question I always ask myself is, if I 4-bet and he shoves, what's my plan? And if you're going to call the shove, then what you're essentially doing is you're effective shoving this situation, because if he shoves, you're going to snap it. If he calls, it's essentially, nothing SPR. So you're essentially putting yourself into commitment. Another thing to consider is that this is a pretty large size 4-bet. If you think about it, yeah, we opened for 4x, and yeah, we faced a 3-bet, and this 4-bet now puts roughly 34 big blinds in the pot, and that's over a third of our stack. And when you put in more than a third of your stack, you're essentially committing yourself, because if you face a shove, you're going to be getting a price that you pretty much have to call. So let's run this in a fold equity calc real quick. So the effective shove right now is 192. That's how much we would be risking. Now, yes, we only put it up to 68 cents here, but if he shoves and we call and we're planning on automatically calling, then we're effectively shoving for $1.92. Pot size right this moment is 32 cents back when we're right here. And then we need our estimated equity. Now remember, this is the equity that we would have against the range that he would resteal and shove with, and we would get it in against. So let's give him a nut range for that. So jacks plus ace king, this is a pretty worst case, so we'll start with that. And we have 29.5, submit it. Notice that we need a significant amount of folds for this to be break even, which would mean that we need one of two things. We either need his 3-bet range here to be really wide so we can fold a lot, or we need him to have a wider range when he does decide to get it all in with us pre-flop. So let's run this a different way. And as always, when you're running this stuff off the table, you should be analyzing this from like 15 different angles. And let's widen this up a bit. We'll go down to 8s, we'll go to ace queen, and let's just run with that for a moment. And again, we're looking at pretty topside weighted stuff, 35% equity. And again, notice we need a lot of folds for this to be break. So let's try to figure out, how wide this needs to get in order for us to feel comfortable getting our stack inside preflop. So let's keep this as the value stuff, and let's throw in some weaker stuff. So some blockers, some stuff like that, maybe some suited connectors. Notice here that we're at 9% of hands, a valet, 47% equity, submit. And notice now all of a sudden we're plus EV if he never folds. And that's because we have a tremendous amount of equity, because we put a tremendous amount of nonsense in his range, stuff that we all of a sudden dominate. Which means that if you're looking at a situation like this, your heavy focus would be that you dominate his preflop range, or you dominate a lot of his preflop range. Obviously, he'll have things like ace king and sometimes ace queen in his stack off range, and those dominate you, which means you need him to have things that you dominate, suited connectors, junky things, ace X that you dominate, that sort of stuff. And the big reason why I'm looking at something like this is to show you how difficult it is to get this all in pre-flop profitably. And ace jack and even ace queens can be very, very difficult to stack off pre-flop profitably, and a lot of players will try to do it way, way, way too common. So be very careful if you find yourself constantly doing that. And in this situation, again, I don't really love the 4-bet, and even worse, in this situation, we have 79 hands on the guy. We just don't have enough info to think that we're going to be able to get it all in pre-flop with an edge, in my opinion, and thus I don't really love this. And in this exact situation, we end up facing the shove from him. At this point, we're getting 2-1 on a call. We need at least 33% equity. And this is what I was talking about. Because we put in more than a third of our stack pre-flop, we're going to be getting this roughly 2-1 price. And now all of a sudden, it goes right back to the discussion we were at here as far as what's our equity. So if we go back and put in that strong range, say 10s plus ace king, throwing in ace queen suited just for buff, we have 32. We're pretty close to making a break-even call. Now, obviously, it's going to be a bit different if he's even stronger, but by the same token, you put yourself in a situation where it's pretty close, and the second you can put any air into his range, you're going to have enough equity, and you're going to have to call this shove. So, yeah, we run into queens this time, whatever. Whether you win or lose this hand isn't really important. What's important is that you make better decisions in this spot in the future. And that's by understanding the math, understanding when your 4-bet is an effective shove, and understanding 4-bet size. And again, putting in more than a 30-year stack pretty much commits you to a shove, and sometimes you want to do that, and oftentimes you don't want to do that. But again, this is pretty simple stuff. We're just using a fold equity calculator, that's free. We're using Poker Stove, that's free. You can use Ecolab or any other sort of free equity software, that's fine too. And just plugging in some very basic stuff. And like I said, when you're doing this stuff off the table, run it with a bunch of different ranges and start understanding your equity with certain hands against certain kinds of ranges so that it just kind of gets ingrained in your head. And when you're playing in real time, you're going to be able to recall that and again, make better decisions in real time.